Good evening, and welcome to Readings in Contemporary Poetry. It's nice to have a good crowd for this first reading of our fall season, now that we're already into October. I'm Megan Whitko. I'm an assistant curator here at DIA, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you tonight. We're also very pleased to have our two poets for this evening, Anne and Carter. Thank you so much for joining us and to be agreeing to be a part of our series. It's an honor. We have an excellent lineup for the rest of fall, and we hope you'll be back for the rest of the season. So Readings in Contemporary Poetry is a part of the Sackler Institute at DIA Art Foundation, and we want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the Levy-Gorvey Gallery, who provides major support for this series. Additional support is provided by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, as well as our media sponsor, which is the Brooklyn Rail. And we also want to thank Brooklyn Brewery for the cold beverages tonight. And we are appreciative of the assistance from all of DIA's staff who help with coordinating the series, particularly Mary Catherine, Maria, Max, and Francesca. So following the first reader, we'll have a brief 10-minute intermission before resuming with the second speaker. And we have a full selection of titles available by both poets, cash only, please, for sale during intermission. And we also have some copies of DIA's newly published Readings in Contemporary Poetry, an anthology, which covers the years 2010 to 2016 of this series. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Vincent Katz, who has been the curator of this series since 2010, and he will introduce our first reader for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you all for coming out on this seemingly fall night. I think the weather is kind of hinting that it might be intimating that perhaps fall will arrive at some point. I'd actually like it to be a little colder. We have a great season, great reading tonight for sure. And on the 24th of this month, Sharon Mesmer and Wayne Kestenbaum will be reading. November 14th, we're having Jen Bervin and Bernadette Mayer. And on December 5th, David Henderson and Andrea Codresco. So hope to see you at one or all of those. First reader tonight will be Anne Stevenson. Anne Stevenson's publications include Wirework, Adventure Club, and The Poles, which is recently published. Her poems have appeared in Across the Margin, The Brooklyn Rail, Delineator, Ladowitch, Recluse, and Sal Mimeo, as well as in the anthology Like Musical Instruments, 83 Contemporary American Poets, which was edited by Larry Fagan. She lives and works in New York City. Anne Stevenson's poetry is exciting in its refusal to submit to synopsis. She modulates textural sophistication and formal acuity with delicately handled insouciance and care of expression that borders on the ecumenical. I mean, she could be saving the world with her poetry, but you wouldn't know that from her poems. They don't emblazon slogans on their desire, but rather let it sink in surreptitiously over time. I think it's because her poems aren't literal. They are about her in the sense that her consciousness permeates every line, and the reader/listener feels they are being given intimate access to someone's interior experience. As for instance, in her poem Performance, which announces up front its performativity of a self. Only Stevenson isn't making any of it up. It's all for real. Quote, "Now that we continue lying in bed, I return to thinking with my skin. I begin to appreciate the extra air. After mourning bullet holes for so long, they made me what I am today. Despite the loss of pinkness, touching feels good." What I like most about Stevenson's poems is that each line opens up. It is connected to the lines before and after, but it asserts its ability to connect differently, not only to them, but to an infinite array of others, some of which trigger in the minds of her readers and listeners. In her most recent collection, she continues this methodical plotting of the truth of line after line. Quote, "Meaning, I suppose, could be my seawall, like a belief in trouble. I'll explain the tide, tomorrow on the beach." Her perseverance ensures we will be guided to many fascinating places for a long time to come. Please help me welcome Anne Stevenson to DIA.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that, Vincent. Incredibly generous introduction. I just want to say right off the bat, this series means so much to me, and it has over the years, so I'm deeply honored to be here and to be reading with Carter. And thank you all for coming, and thank you to Dia and Megan and Mary Catherine and Max and everyone for putting it all together. So, I thought I'd read you some poems, and I'm going to get right to that. Can you hear me okay? Steadily. I will keep it in sight, keep it on the bedrock, keep it canned, and you will understand it perfectly. I will appear to take part, be included, inscribe myself on the wall or in the general mood, speaking out of habit to conclude that something is the case, loosely fastened. I cut in line, I had a pass. They bit their tongues and complimented my shoes, noted the colors of my head and how I blended in with the dried catkins funneled above. On the anniversary of my showing up, recorded what things looked like. Emotions as consumer goods, final goods with regard to attractiveness, especially when human shapes were fuzzy in outline, numbered or illustrated in a book. I think of something small, calculated with small maths, as in the problem of the broken arm or the shrinking violet, deliberately not seeing the difference between creeping and walking. With the practice of a lazy eye, the way doesn't matter. How could it be? Never to feel new again, the mountain goat twiddling opposable thumbs. But you're part of a success story, sure to end with a merit badge, performed as preamble to someone else's story. Some type of voodoo, the result of a snake bite and the long climb down, leaving no trace of yourself as a courtesy to others. No telling how many, each inappropriate woolens and furs. Notwithstanding the elements, trees trained by wind, cocked to light. Let's begin again at the porter's behest. More beds than bodies, more gifts than gods. Come back to camp where it all happens twice a day, 2 kicks to the head, a burgeoning mushroom. To the base of the great mountain, with its storm and precipice, deadly cold. Too much to take in by one set of dry eyes alone. Pinnacle warped by permanent snow. Moving on to the next round, sipping the future, an inquiry into someone else's mind. Caught in a fog bow, the very first wrinkle fell to earth, muffling its sound in recompense. I'm sorry. You weren't meant to be studied, not for the reason you think. Coming around, it's the air you wake for. AC poem, or Adventure Club poem. With our cast finally assembled in this fugue state, where blue feels hot and green storms cause these things to seem untrue, or at least unfamiliar, like the physics of folding and stuffing, we proudly present nothing you'd be interested in, a magnetic pillow for your freckled head. But anyway, we're glad you came with your propensity for going without air, leaving your old life behind with little stomach for the turbulence of a new one. Night is painted on the ceiling. Now you are characterized with bright suspicion. You think you're so great, engulfed in flames. Well, you're not all that good. Add a little rain and the value decreases. Each word an addendum. Old shibboleths rolling off your tongue until longing sets in, and nothing matches the words in your head, the advertorial. The Commons. Not made of anything, in the sense that a dog run or the right to turn on red are not made of anything. I know what space I want to occupy. By space, I mean cabin. By cabin, I mean future. It is from this paddock that I want to bolt. Be horrible for a change. Why not? Every misgiving has its own intelligence. Knowing what it is to crack a bone, simply wreck it. Both oceans are near me. I press on, push back, set forth, or swim, a new habit. I've surrendered my high wire act, bowed out of the tent. It too was unknowable. And while we can no longer enjoy salt together, I understand your position entirely. Poem. Being almost glamorous, with a little strap of leather suspended between sea and sky, she will be decadent in her own discerning company. A series of screens block the light. I reconstruct her, a bas-relief festooned with rubble. She was born underwater, studied the classes of plants, stem by stem, parted clouds with her sword and all the tall flowers. Not to be fixed at the foot of a cliff or easily exhausted by the climb, but standing with a rock in each hand, adding to her pleasure. To what do I owe this one? The day is split in half, the first entirely water with an urge to float, the second hollowed out. Theater piece. All day, the scanners were scanning. You washed up and left the talkative building, arranging your sections as lavender, security, coffee, breeze. No time for outsiders. Rocks and lots and corrugated boxes, you'll want to save those. If you enter looking worried, everyone will worry and rise and knock your block off, making the children laugh. It's your show. The contract confirms it. And now there's plague in the lobby. That takes care of intimacy. Dim the lights, feed the fire. Buttercups appear in the flames. They won't last, even with gentle wooing. Human nature. Gentle doctor, I roll up my sleeve to welcome the requisite rigors. My bents are peculiar. The river is survived by its daughter, the creek. Now I've made her my puddle. Events of my youth may return. Later, I become a fixer. Toolboxes, dictionaries, tape, light bulbs, bright to the finish. Get a load of this now. There's dirt in her eye. I'll fix it. Rain clouds. This next poem is called Optimism. That was a good one, but I bet you can't define a bluff, a high, steep headland. You were the watcher. Your considered purpose was to issue a resounding call to arms. From the ramparts, disperse advice, let it flow, with images from the veteran street photographer. Blue fetters on feet. Frozen under yesterday's umbrella, you watch ice darken and drip in Thunder Alley. Someone has made an impression with a letter of an alphabet or a musical note, a feeling of rotation or migration, points, lines, curves. The 4-minute mile, once thought to be beyond human achievement, is now a snap. A little breach of protocol, pistons, and propellers. Address the barbarians directly as your friends. With the finesse of a family druggist, flickering lights may not confuse you, affect a look of surprise. Blocked by a tall reveal, the picture taught you how to look. Here is a red truck, a dog collar, a hotel. Keep returning to the same place with tired managerial tread, business in California, leisure in West Virginia. A crime has been committed, they shut down the block. How boring everything ends in immunity. Most of what is new remains empty. There goes the funeral march, hopping on one leg. Borough president. The branch reached the 3rd floor and flowered by my window. Did I notice? The glass was dirty, or I had a lazy eye. But with a flush of cheek, it changed. Try not to get to it with words. Were you on the Staten Island ferry going home? It's Saturday, but the assholes can't take my apartment away from me, can they? The city runs backwards. The rivers are zeros. The trees are ones. The corner hibiscus in full bloom, ready for romance. I'd like some. Anything running counter to the plan. Have you disembarked yet? Are you flashing your horn? Picking a fight, discussing food with someone who reminds you of your grandmother? Rita. Penance shown, which happens to be an anagram of my name, just as a fun fact. Or just a fact. Penance shown. A public service announcement advised me to be myself, but that required a context. My interiority is buttoned up. It's going to be my neck rolled up in batting so I don't injure myself. More serums for my teen skin type. Messy in my entirety to accommodate reality. Referring to a glossary. The totality of real things in the world, independent of my knowledge or perception. A kind of existence or universe, connected to or separate from other kinds. The fallout. The fallout mustn't be monitored, considering that everything changes hands. You are weighted by ones your own size, arranged in a graph according to where you've been dragged, sandbagged at a custom storage wall, with cheap maps framed ostentatiously and enormous shadows held by air. My fickle intuitionist, you are here like a cat in cattails. This indexing is a way of erasing. Indifferent sunlight passes through as means call out to their ends. You supervise the forcing of a bulb while simple power outage sweetens the pot. Beyond mind, moth-eaten, routine drills. Ad hoc poem. Here's an overview of their motion, if that's possible. Notice the eglantine in papers, not the wallflowers. Don't get on the train. Let someone else take the trip, one who can afford it. She's a queer one. Leaving little to worry about, happy with her inner idea, but it was the station, not the train, that moved. I, teenager. The boy kissed the back of his hand, knocked me off my cot. Tell no one how it ended. Swan skimming lake or dark horse circling. Presently, my hideout is empty. I'm not going to leave. I can't swim through the muck or go barefoot to assert my snubs and estimations. But there's my resolve shining, buckling at a sneeze, popping back up to record happiness from television. All the colors, I could go on loving them. The horses have their romances. I too, quick and quiet. Boy, be on your way. Something else looked me dead in the eye. Little dear, with pounding heart, what kept you? How's it going? Lemons and cherries. In Jackson Square, we were close with the birds who came around to show off their families. A quick contest for the lead. But it was different 10 blocks east, where little Apis mellifera's clan entered the park, inciting a frenzy over her lineage. While across the street, an elegy to 36 elms, innumerable birds, a dozen restaurants all shuttered, cut, sanded, and swapped for a bank. We don't like ourselves inside banks or drugstores. Don't like the things we say once inside. One day, when picking up a prescription, an emptiness took me over and I had to wrestle it to the curb. This would happen many times in future, occasionally in hardware stores, but never near flowers about to bloom or birds posturing with even a minimum of charm. I know this to be true. The poem. 1, I didn't have a kid with you after all. 2, your grammar is right where you left it. 3, file it with common mistakes, English language. Take the quiz again. You'll ace it one day. 4, and now you know the questions to offset the answers, or words. The river is flooding. It's acting in a movie. 5, where it's damp, it's sour too. Worry always wins. It's your thing. The background makes you look brave. This is hardly news. Alligator, cat, cow, crab, turkey, pigeon. None of these will be visiting this year. Please let your customers know. So I have 2 more poems, and I just want to say thank you again. And I very much look forward to hearing Carter read. Lifelike. My friendships told their stories. 2 weeks later, I'm interested in what will kill us. Later, as in I'll see you later, or the hurricane will happen later, or not enough sleep was to blame. Why do I think that everything will be explained by someone I run into on the street? No one needs to know how these things end, or to what purpose. On with the program. Kevin wants to show off his woodworking skills. I dreamt I was listening from up above the rafters because I was sleeping there among the new angles. New ideas popped up and caught on. I thanked everyone for coming to the dream, for sticking around. Also, your life will be over soon. Is that good or bad news? Not sure where to go with it. Why can't we just breathe? Instead, we choke. But on what? Water, air, salt, sky, creating case histories for the survivors. Sooner or later, a flood will come, but now we know what to do with it. Siphon, push broom. French horn. I wait out the fading siren and return to sleep. It rains 1 drop at a time. I try to recall a fragrance, but only come up with dust. I cut a little hole in the poem and look through it, into the next room, and out at the violet evening. My mind goes everywhere at once, yet everything is the way it should be, flushed, then fading, like this instrument. Thank you.
Carter Ratcliff's books of poetry include Fever Coast, Culture Foundation, Give Me Tomorrow, Vehicle Editions, and Arrivederci Modernismo, Libellum books. His poetry has appeared in such journals as The World, Baffler, Cimarron Review, La Presa, Sienese Shredder, and Vanitas. His novel, Tequila Mockingbird, was published in 2015 by Station Hill Press. He's the author of several books as an art critic, including The Fate of a Gesture, Jackson Pollock and Post-War American Art, and Out of the Box, The Reinvention of Art, 1965 to 75. He's contributed to monographs on Andy Warhol, Gilbert and George, and Nabil Nahas, among others. Carter Ratcliff's poetry is hard to define. Schooled in the murky syntactical byways mapped out by John Ashbery, possessed of the skill and grace of other New York School avatars, Ratcliff charts his own course. I'm sure there are classical models in there as well. I hear some faint echoes of Horace, for instance. But he's worked hard to keep his language contemporary, his syntax individual. Another element of Ratcliff's poetic persona was formed in the 1960s and 70s around the Poetry Project in New York. There, the premium was on a language that was generational, and Ratcliff participates in that as well. What sets him apart are his frames of reference and his attitude towards the poem. I understand poetry as dramatic monologue, he has written. The poet imagines a person and speaks or writes in that person's voice. His recent poems often take on topics, as in his poem, American This, American That, which contains these lines: American odds and American ends, American odes and American endings, American acting, which isn't really acting or really isn't acting. Ratcliff's 1973 publication, Fever Coast, published by Lita Hornick's Culture Foundation, is an amazing book. It is epic in its restraint, and I guess that is a defining feature of Ratcliff's poetry. Here is a quote from his poem, The Search, from that collection. Tomorrow means nothing, it's true, but meaninglessness must still be embodied somehow in something that meant something to someone, a lost puppy, even a puppy I never noticed. So entrancing was the surf I no longer had to enter. So bright and at the same time leaden were the waves, the foam splashing, but not splashing me. Foaming occurs more frequently in Ratcliff's poetry than anyone else's. Partly, I think this is a reference to the idea that beauty can be born out of nothing or of pure desire, but also because to foam is an idea in itself, akin to the senses of to bloom, to be in one's prime, to ferment, to be eminent, to abound in, to swarm with. Carter Ratcliff's poetry does and is all of those things. Please join me in welcoming him to DIA.
Well, thank you for that introduction. That was wonderful and gives me a lot to think about. And thank you all for coming, and I want to thank DIA and all the help that they gave in organizing, and it's really great to be reading with Anne. If I want to switch over. Phyllis and I came down from upstate, so I thought I would begin with a poem called Ode to the Difference Between a City House and a Country House. There's a native of upstate New York called Andrew Jackson Downing who published a book in 1815 called The Architecture of the Country House. And he was upset. People were moving upstate and building houses, but the houses that they were building, as he saw them anyway, looked as if they'd just been transplanted from Fifth Avenue or something. He felt they didn't fit in. So he published this book to help people see how they can make their country houses blend into the countryside. A lot of houses upstate do blend into the countryside. I don't know how much we have to thank Andrew Jackson Downing for that, but it was something that obsessed him and produced a whole book, which is a very interesting book. Ode to the Difference Between a City House and a Country House. This is the difference between you in the light and debt to shadow, and you having just now disappeared into the glare of the far from trustworthy claim that no one sees you, not as I see you, no one here, in this uselessly crowded street. A city house is a refuge. A country house is a theory of the enfranchisement that practice makes perfect, but only here in the country, where perfection, namely you, needs no refuge. At the dawn of the modern age, there were many boxes. Movers moved them into the future, and modernity launched itself by looking into the boxes to see that the right things had been left behind. Turned out, much to no one's real surprise, that everything had been left behind, even the old idea of the difference between the city and the country. Real or not, surprise needed somewhere to live, somewhere to cultivate this new idea about the self, that it is something one has and cultivates. And from your mother's and your mother's mother's knack for artifice comes the difference between you in sweetly infested sunlight and you as a demographic factor, a difference, empty and unable to choose between the city house and the country house, between keeping the shoulder pressed hard against the modern wheel and wondering idly about the difference between you in my arms on the sleeping porch and you in the role of the one who is always the same, wherever you are, sleeping or waking, leaving me alone in the screened-in wilderness or taking me with you deep into the darkness of modern times, which gives me nothing to do but watch you digging in your insomniac purse for the irritable key to the city house. Since we're at Dia, I thought I would read a couple of poems more or less about art. The first one is called The Laws of Art, which is not a notion I feel it's sort of in effect, but not ever called that. You know, the 17th and 18th century academies tried to come up with the laws of art or the rules of art. It occurred to me that a style, once it gets established, is a set of rules. It's never called that exactly, but that puts you in the position of looking for someone who can master the style, but somehow break the rules at the same time. Anyway, the laws of art. To break a law of art is to promulgate another law. Those who comprehend the newer law ignore it, for they are free and know that whatever they do, they obey the law. Others don't know what to do. They say, how is freedom to be obeyed? What does obedience mean? If a heap of stones can be a church, but it is my church, this heap of stones, it demands of me not belief, but attentiveness. To rest up from its rigors, I visit a place where the objects know me. I know them, if not by name, then by their colors. The place where there is a place, where everything and everything is in its place, the land of the good witch. My land could be like that if it only tried, or so the good witch says, but I say no. She insists. She insists there must be coherence in this heap of stone. This heap of stones, these scraps of talk. She says, if I am wrong, I will cast a spell. She casts a spell, but it doesn't work. The coherence we feel is not her doing, is not the kind that makes a place for every familiar thing and sends it with or without its dinner to the brightly colored dungeon of its place. She says, my next spell will work, but she's wrong, it doesn't work. She says, never mind, come and live with me. You don't care about those old stones, you don't believe in them. It's true, I don't, but I want to live in my lawless land, the new land brought forth by the newer laws of art, the very latest. I love the good witch, but I want to be free. The next poem is called The Loves of the Picture Plane. When I first showed up in the New York art world, there was a lot of talk about the picture plane. People don't talk about it much anymore. It's kind of a shame. I mean, the talk about the picture plane was very complex and very deeply felt. It was kind of limited. So I thought it might be nice to get beyond those limits. The loves of the picture plane. These include flatness, integrity, and the nearness of you. Texture is always welcome, provided it's not too fussy and, all the grand dualisms that sustain the Western tradition. Appearance and reality, body and mind, body and soul, don't remember. Anyway, bread and butter, form and content, Popeye and olive oil, castles in Spain, and don't forget rocks and Gibraltar, time and tide, train in the station, peanut butter, and unidentified jelly. The picture plane loves to see and be seen and seen through and talked about, especially by those who are faithful to the worry that no one really knows or cares about planarity anymore, how it must be watered daily with tears of concentration and properly primed in the time before time, the time before the image began to appear. The picture plane in all its serene assertiveness loves the depths of the veranda at dusk and feels that wishing is turning it into a firefly, something seen and then not, and never forgotten because remembered only pro forma. There was time, but not time enough. The picture plane loves you, loves the hope of your returning for another look, loves the rustling in the leaves, the endless quarrel between pure form and literary content, between yes and no, between maybe and what on earth do you think you're doing? This is the quarrel between sleep and dawn, warmth and the blanket, the quarrel between nearness and you. The next poem is called The Jealous Kind. Nothing too obscure, except it does mention characters from the Commedia dell'arte, specifically Pierrot and his great love, Columbine. The jealous kind. I am jealous of traffic because it is random, champagne because it is predetermined, grass because it is green. I'm jealous of you, light, of the ease of your entry into the room and thought. You too, autumn. I'm jealous of your special relationship with nature at her most gorgeously glum. Sleep sometimes makes me doubtful, and so does waking. In sleep, it is not certain who I am or whom I love, and then I awake and I fall to wondering who loves me. So I'm jealous of you, geometric forms, because you are certain in a way that I can never be. Whether I am asleep or awake, a square has 4 sides. A right angle sweeps across 90 degrees, precisely. A circle is circular, and yet I am never certain if I am awake or asleep or if uncertainty of that sort is possible. How could it be? And how could I be jealous of sand? But I am. I wish I could be traipsed into the house on an afternoon unable to make a graceful departure, able only to hand the day's glory on to evening. And I am jealous of everyone who has, kindly enough, overlooked my ungraceful departures. And you, Pierrot, I'm jealous of you, because you stole Columbine from me. And not only from me, you stole her from the worship of the ground that she walks on, the very air that we breathe. I am jealous of anyone who turns life into theater, because hope in the theater is never entirely pointless, especially not the hope of a revival. I'm jealous even of you, jealousy. What must it be like to be felt so intensely by so many people the world over throughout the ages? What must it be like to be proof that I am alive to some purpose, even if I only think I know what it is, and will find, if I ever do find my true purpose, that I was never, not really, the jealous kind. The next poem is called The Mind Tenders Its Resignation. This takes off from the brain-mind distinction, which may be getting lost these days, I'm not sure. But and the other obscure thing is that at the middle of the retina is something called the fovea, which is a blind spot, which is blind spot right at the center of vision. The mind tenders its resignation. And in that vast subterranean workshop, the brain, there is dismay. The heart takes it badly. Investors in sentiment are bearish. We're in a period of profit-taking now. Prospects for a nosedive are bright. The fovea, that blind spot, dreams of hegemony. The adrenals shift to consultant work. The feet continue to do their stuff in a slipshod manner, admittedly. There's no procedure for accepting the mind's resignation. It was not in the interests of the mind to develop one. Does this mean the mind will stay on? Only the mind could know. And quite obviously, that knowledge is not in its best interests at present. A recourse to belief is a possibility, albeit vague. The mind was derelict in many respects, derelict to the point of ecstasy, sheer rhapsodic mindlessness. But why not face it? It's flattery to say the mind was mindless. The mind was a damn fool, period. It knew shit from Shinola, and that was about it. No, correction. It knew the meaning of the word fear. And it knew how to make an entrance. And it knew how to get my goat, face it. The mind knew how to wrap my life around its little finger. I hated it for that, and God, I miss it now. I miss it so terribly much. A lot of my poems sort of go off into what is known as the American Sublime, which is pretty much like the old world Sublime, only more sublime. More, even less limited, less mappable, so to speak. This is called the American Sphinx. The American Sphinx. Where the water stops, the smithereens begin. All else follows at a distance, and one day gives the face in the crowd to the body in the bed. There were awkward questions, but none posed by the Sphinx, who had the decency to die of wounds self-inflicted by these wide-open spaces. In a more tightly woven polity, we'd be fretting. Do two wrongs make a right? Is the enemy of my enemy really my friend? But our smithereens are rugged, if not exactly individualists. And hiding everything that hid you, the Sphinx's ghost leaves you utterly visible, darling. And sculpted by this twilit fear that our bafflement is immature. Too bad it can never teach us to care if hers is a sword that guarantees the rights of smithereens, the right to assemble, the right to say they saw you in the darkness of her riddle, rights we must never take for granted, not even in our republic, because remember, we were an empire and colonized ourselves. And so history is just standing there, tapping her foot, as if it were up to us to sift the data that is molten until we find the icy color of the clouds and decide to call it a day. But what do you call night? This is the brain teaser that prompts me to ask, how can you be so far away, so seamlessly at one with all that I abandon when you hold me in your arms? And how can you be so near to me when doubt is what I have embraced and the darkness isn't yours and I have entered it. The next poem is one that Vincent quoted from in his introduction. Out there in the American Sublime, I've written the American poem, the American Pastoral, American Night, American Theory, the American Academy on Mars, and so much American this and American that I finally did write this poem, American this and American that. The only thing I want to say before I read, Bernardo Bertolucci, the Italian film director, once said that American actors don't act, they just behave, which is a thought that comes up toward the end of this poem. American this, American that. The migratory patterns have written you out of their will, and so, as you know better than anyone else, the seasons go on as usual. Here it is cold, here is the land of American snow, the whispering pines, and the back porch, the milk frozen solid to explain why the shapes of the bottle never changed, though they did, of course, in about 1945, and now everything is in those cartons. You go to open them, and sometimes the spout goes all awry, like the American future, American firepower, American intelligence, xenophobia, know-how, American odds, and American ends, American odes and American ending, American acting, which isn't really acting or really isn't acting. There's no technique, nothing learned, just behavior, though behavior can be learned and usually is, and so that's how that works, and that's the American secret, as you very well know, being as you are, the American Sphinx, and the American Orpheus, you figure that must be Marlon Brando. The last poem I'm going to read is called Loved Your Hamlet. That point that Vincent mentioned in his introduction about the idea that my poems are dramatic monologues, I think they probably all are, even when they seem as though it's me who's speaking. It's the me who's speaking is not, I shouldn't say the real me, because who knows, but there's always, I always feel that there's some sort of voice other than the one that I'm familiar with as my own, that's the voice in the poem. The dramatic, so I feel I write dramatic monologues, which is a form that originates in theater. You think back to Elizabethan theater, not just Hamlet and Shakespeare, but all the others, Christopher Marlowe and Ben Jonson and so on. There's often a point where one of the actors steps up to the front of the stage and starts talking either to the audience or into the void. And the dramatic interchange with others is for the moment, for the length of that speech, over. And then it resumes, usually. That's called a soliloquy, of course. And the soliloquy is kind of the ancestor of all these poems by Browning and T.S. Eliot and Berryman and so many others that are called dramatic monologues. This poem is in the voice not of Hamlet, but of a fan, of an actor who's just had a run playing Hamlet. And then as the poem goes on, the actor becomes the character, but it's still in the voice of this fan of the Shakespearean actor. Loved your Hamlet. Loved your Hamlet. Loved the depths you probed. Like to probe them myself sometime. One felt, here's a man who feels, who gets ideas, who can read, but not without moving his lips. That's what I call theater, having your cake and spewing its better half out into the void. Loved your unplayable scenes. I'd like to quit playing them myself sometime. That's theater, when the absurdity of it all is finally good enough to introduce to Mother. Loved the real tears, they were electric. And I loved what they added to the river. Loved the river, running down to the sea in dramatic twitches, and the stiffness of the crocuses with snow still nestled round. Adored the smarminess you got away with, being an intellectual. But look at you now. Earth is awaking to its sinecure, fecundity, but the day that clings to you like the smell of grease paint is never long enough for all the procrastinating you have to do. Brilliantine is back, but you're still frizzy. Paisley is back, silk is back, but you're still in that terry cloth. Tell me, soldier, what did you do after you shaved this morning? Don't tell me, let me guess. The court is in disarray, administratively sound, but lacking opportunity for merit. Poesy is on the skids, its self-doubts preempting your own. The big questions of a socio-economic nature have generated a horrific style with which you are not at home, for home to you was a single question. Why soliloquy? Rather, why is soliloquy unanswerable? And if unanswerable, why not unaskable? For it is asked unendingly of you. And if unendingly, reducing soliloquy to a single question, why unasked does its own end eventually come? And when it does, why is it not in the form of an answer, you having fallen so obligingly silent so awfully long ago? Thank you.